Yeah, we're live. It is 11:56. So happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Hope you guys had just like over 8 like everybody else for Thanksgiving. It was awesome having the, you know, always getting together with family. I know sometimes it can be trying because there's always at least one or two family members that can be, in everybody's family. They can be problematic, which makes it exciting. People want to, I don't know, they want to argue about all sorts of stuff, political stuff or whatever. That's what, that's like the spice of life. But things seems awesome. It all worked out great for us, and so we got to see family come over and stuff, and it was very, very cool. So hopefully you guys had a good Thanksgiving, and now we're we're just like a month from Christmas. Seems like it was just yesterday that we already had that. But more importantly, today is Black Friday, so get out and make sure to go check out richardoldnerperformance.com. And I want to talk about a couple things today. One, obviously we got big sales going on over there, and really this is getting toward the end of the year kind of for us. So I want to thank everybody for supporting it. We've grown a lot and it's been great. It gives us the opportunity to try to invest and do more things and try to get more products, even products that are just ours, like the turbo kit. We were having a casting done for the manifold, which is an expensive kind of proposition, and also time consuming, unfortunately. Like, we wanted to come out with the turbo kit and have it be ready right away so everyone could get it, and not that there's no shortage of turbo kits already available out there. We like the way that this one came out, and so I think guys are excited about that. But we decided, rather than do to do fabricated exhaust manifolds, which that's what Jimmy built. He built the first one. And to do it like that, which is possible, we decided to do a casting, and the longevity of that, and ultimately, if we sell enough of these kits, that the cost will be good, but it'll all work out. So it's just taking a little longer, but we want to do more things like that in coming up next year. For us, we're going to add more products to richardoldnerperformance.com, probably other low buck truck style camshafts, maybe for different engine families. And so I'm going to be testing those a couple of those before the end of the year. And so we can get those out for people. That will be good. So not just the LS guys will be able to enjoy the low buck style stuff and get more performance and things. Now, I don't know that there are a lot of other applications other than the Hemi where we can get the kinds of gains that you get. You look like a hero with an LS thing. They take a 4.8 or 5.3 or 6.0 and put a low buck truck camshaft in, and all of a sudden and you gain 60 horsepower or something. It's that's a big swing. That's a big hit for just a camshaft. You put cam and springs in it. Now you're probably going to need bigger injectors just because you gain so much power, which, oh no, that's terrible. I gained so much more power that I had to put bigger injectors in. I know it's an expense, but the plus side of that is that you gained enough power where you need more fuel. I don't know that those are there for a lot of other applications, because other than the Hemi, because I don't know a lot of other applications where it has, like, oh, you got awesome cylinder heads, you got an awesome intake manifold and a mild cam, and now you need a better camshaft, and so you can pick up stuff. But there are other applications where camshafts are definitely desired, and cost-effective camshafts that get good gains relative to what that package can achieve. And so we're looking at some of those, and we're going to be testing some of those already. We already have some of them done, at least the prototype pieces. And so we're going to be testing those coming up. I should be testing some of those in December, which will be good. And then we'll try to have production pieces, ready as quickly as possible, assuming that I was able to do my job and get the cams right, and that they're going to offer good power and stuff. And you never know. You don't know until you test it. I mean, you kind of know based on what's happened in the past, but I myself, as a big proponent of wanting people to test and verify stuff rather than just do it on a computer, I don't know. For me, I don't know until I test it. I don't know for certain, hey, it did this. And that way we can show you, hey, look, when you put this camshaft in, it does this, and that's good. So we have that stuff coming up. But more importantly for today, we want to talk about turbo stuff. And the photo that I have up for the thumbnail is a small block Chevy, is a twin turbo small block Chevy. And I wanted to talk about small block Chevys, but actually this applies to all the, let's say, other guys kind of applications, because LS is the big thing, is the biggest market out there going right now. But that doesn't mean that other people aren't doing the same kind of thing to other motors. A small block Chevy is a good example. When we talk about stuff, junkyard LS is the thing. You go get a junkyard LS, you cam and springs and injectors and pump and put a turbo on it or whatever, and you make good power. You can also do that for the small block Chevy guys. If you're doing a fuel injected one, obviously you have to make some changes for that. And in this case, the thumbnail that I have up is a carbureted one, but it works equally well. I have videos up on small block Chevys where we've done turbo applications on tune port motors or just fuel injected motors with high rams on, or not high rams, but stealth rams on them, fuel injected kind of manifold other than the long runner tune port thing. And whatever you're going to put it on, whatever the base motor is, that's just your starting point. So on a tune port motor, we started out with a motor that makes power at a lower engine speed because of the long runner length. And so it still does that with a turbo. You just got to get a turbo that spools up in the RPM range that you want to spool up. Luckily, you have lots of extra torque from the long runner deal. And so it spools up and makes big power. But it basically makes the same power as it did when it was NA, assuming that you have not some sort of trickery done to your boost curve. It just does more of that. And in that case, in the tune port case, it's just lots of torque and then, not as much horsepower, like 100 foot-pounds more torque than it made horsepower. So that's pretty normal. In the case of this small block, it's a little bit more even. If you take a small block Chevy, a 350 Chevy, I think that this one was about a 400 horsepower one. It had a dual plane intake manifold, a carburetor, had ported heads on it, had a mild camshaft in it. And so it was, or a 224-ish or kind of camshaft. And so it was closer to 400 horsepower. But just like every motor, if this was a small block Dodge or anything, a Jeep or a Pontiac or whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. If that's your starting point, like in our case on this small block Chevy, it was elaborate because we put twin turbos on it. It didn't need to be any of that. It just could have been a single turbo in this power level because we only made I think we ran it up to 650 or 700 horsepower, something like that. But, you take a 400 horsepower motor, add a turbo to it, or in this case, two, and that didn't matter. The twins versus single, all that it did is it just gave us more turbo and a softer spool, which in this case, these are just turbos I had sitting around. I think that these were probably the CX Racing 76 millimeter turbos, which wouldn't be the turbos that I would pick for this. I would pick a single on that particular motor. Probably would just pick a GTX 3584 RS or a G35, a single, and then run that as a single on the small block, and then just blow through. We blew through that CSU carburetor in this case. You could also blow it through fuel injection. And then we took a 400 horsepower motor and made a 600 horsepower motor at, I think in this case, it was 7.5 or 8 pounds. And then we went up, just like you do with a turbo, take our manual boost controller like we have on sale right now at richardholdnerperformance.com. But you take a manual controller, just a bleed valve that tricks the signal going to the wastegate, just the bottom of the wastegate, just the simplest kind of thing. You have a reference line going from the manifold to the controller and the controller to the bottom of the wastegate, and you just bleed some of the signal out and it says, oh, look, I'm only making 8 pounds. I need to spool up more. And it's actually making 10 now because you've tricked it. And that's how the wastegate controller works. It's very, very simple. And so we turn the boost up just like you do. And that's both a blessing and a curse. And then, excuse me, in terms of the turbo stuff, because it's just so easy to get more and more power. And when you're talking about, on a 400 horsepower motor, with each pound of boost, if you get another 30 horsepower or so, it's, in 3 pounds, you're getting up near 100 horsepower. Changing the power output by 100 horsepower is a lot. That's a big percentage. You definitely feel that because you're also changing it by 100 foot-pounds or more, depending on what the power curve and the torque curves look like, where they're crossing at. You could be getting more than 100 foot-pounds of torque, and you definitely notice stuff like that. And turning it up from 7 pounds to 10 pounds, as long as the air fuel is right and the timing is right, because the tune is critical on these turbo applications. When you do that, you're like, oh yeah, that's really great. And then you go, well, that it was so easy to add 68 to 100 horsepower. So easy to do that. Then I need to go to the next 100 horsepower. And then you're like, how much boost will it take and all that? And you get into all that. It can become problematic. only because it's so easy to add the different, a huge amount of power. Like when you're doing an NA motor, you get a small block Chevy like this, you have a dual plane intake manifold, you got a carburetor on it, you got a distributor, you got ported heads and roller rockers, the kind of normal things that you'd have on a small block Chevy. You're like, okay, how can I improve the power? Well, we could try a carb spacer. We can try a, lash loops. This is a hydraulic flat tap or a hydraulic roller camshaft. So you're not going to get a whole bunch from adjusting the preload on the lifter. We can try a carb spacer, which can affect power, usually kind of a trade situation for a carb spacer on a dual plane. We could try timing and you could try jetting the carburetor, but ultimately you're like, this is kind of what it does. And then you go with a turbo, you go, oh, look, here's another 30, here's another 30, here's another 30, or 40, or whatever the number is based on whatever the NA power output, because the NA power output is going to dictate how much you get per pound of boost if you have a turbo that will support that extra power. So when you go, oh, look, there's 30. Oh, look, there's 30. Or look, there's 30. You're like, this is pretty fun. It's like a video game. I want to keep doing this. And then you see, if you're a dyno guy like I am, you just see the curve like jump up each time. You're like, oh yeah, this is just awesome. And that's one of the benefits of having a turbo. It's also the curse. Look, this was easy. Oh, look, this was easy. And now I have a broken motor because I turned it up past where I had the proper tune for it, or where I had a strength issue or something. Usually the strength issue is pretty far up there. Usually somebody hurt something because they ran out of fuel pump or injector or carb tuning or timing control, whatever, the wastegate control, maybe they ran into other kinds of issues. But the cool thing about this is, and this is important for the small block Chevy guys and the Mopar guys and any other kind of engine family Pontiac guys. I've run a turbo on a Pontiac 350 and on lots of different motors, is that the turbo doesn't care about what motor it's on. It doesn't, like if it's a 400 horsepower LS or a 400 horsepower small block or a 400 horsepower Pontiac or a 300 horsepower one or whatever the numbers are, it doesn't matter what that is. It doesn't, a Pontiac turbo combination isn't different than a small block Chevy combination, or based on the power output versus the turbo that you use is the same. It doesn't there's nothing specific about that. So like the turbos that we have for sale for the LS work on Pontiacs, they work on small block Chevys or big block Chevys, they work on all of those things. I get in this discussion with a lot of people about carburetors also. When we talk about carburetors, they're like, oh, this big block Chevy needs it needs an 850 carburetor. The factory had 800 CFM quadrajets on them. It's a 350 horsepower big block. It does not need an 800 CFM carburetor. Can you get away with one? Yeah, it works just fine. And it would arguably work better on the bigger motor than it would on the smaller motor. But it doesn't need that. It needs a carburetor for a 350 horsepower motor, which is much smaller than that. And the same kind of thing with turbos is that if you're starting out with a big block Chevy and you want to feed it, you can get away with a little bit bigger turbo because you're going to have more response because it's going to have more average power. But when you're starting out with 350 or 400 horsepower and you want 800, you still use that turbo. You still use a turbo that it's capable of supporting 800 horsepower. And so these turbos that we have and wastegates and boost controllers and all, and now we also have mirror image turbos available at the store. So the stuff is on sale now. So go check out the turbos and other things, but all of those things work on all of the other motors. I've done videos on turbos where we've run the same turbo on a Honda motor and a LS motor and big blocks and small blocks and all kinds of things, so that you can see that when guys tell you it won't work, no, it 100% will work. There's going to be a optimum turbo, but when guys talk about stuff like that, they're talking about something where we're maxing the turbo out. So we want to take an RB 26 or 25 or 20 or whatever, or a K series or a J series or an F series or whatever, and we want to max that turbo out. There is a turbo of any given power output that would be optimum for that. And we want to make 800 horsepower with that. Okay, there is an 800 horsepower turbo. Is that turbo the same as one that we put on an LS? No, because you're not going to make 800 because you're going to run out of hot side flow before that. But the turbo will still do what the turbo does at a lower level on the bigger motor, because until you run out of hot side flow, it's going to be a lot more responsive, but it still does work. And some of the pictures that people paint are like, no, you can't use that. I'm like, no, you 100% can. If you want 800 horsepower and you want it to be, less laggy or whatever, then you choose a bigger hot side for that on the bigger motor. But it will work. It does make boost. And unless you're in a situation where you're trying to max out the turbo, it actually works pretty well. So let's see what you guys got going on. Hopefully you guys all had an awesome Thanksgiving, because I know that we had a lot, and I'm just happy. I'm thankful for that we had cherry pie for dessert, because that's one of my favorites. Darren. Always good to talk small block Chevys. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. What rod and main bearing would be comparable to OEM on LS tri-metal, bimetal, King, Cleveite? Not sure what to order. Took mine apart to have the crank polished. Were your bearings in bad shape? Ordered cam springs push rods literally yesterday. Awesome. Yesterday was a big sales day. I have to say the Black Friday time are huge for people buying stuff. So, and then apparently Thursday before that is Thanksgiving. As soon as people got off of Thanksgiving and were done with that, apparently they went to their computers and started ordering stuff, which is awesome. What are you guys going to do with PCV vent to atmosphere or draw through turbo? Do you mean when are we going to do that? When are we going to try draw through turbo? The next live feed that I do is going to be about that. It's going to be about draw through stuff, because the question will be, do you want me to do I was thinking about putting the Holley 1-barrel or 2-barrel thing that they sent me that's originally for the Ford inline 6-cylinder. Do you want me to run that? I was thinking about running it. I am going to run it. I'm going to run it on the Metro. I'm going to get the Metro started with that setup so that I can tune it. But it also got me thinking, hey, I can get the Sprint turbo. I can get that motor running on that. Just get it running so that it runs and idles and stuff, and just make sure the thing has oil pressure and all that. It won't be what we would use when we go to Bonneville. We'll run the Haltech on it. But I can get that thing started up. And there's always happiness about getting a motor and transmission and all that stuff swapped in there and just getting it so that it starts up and idles and stuff. So I'll probably will be doing this. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. Will you offer retrofit small block Chevy hydraulic roller lifters? We don't, not retrofit ones. But I think that the hydraulic roller lifter is the same for a small block Chevy and for an LS, but not for a retrofit for a block that wasn't ever equipped with hydraulic roller stuff for an earlier model block. Those will more than likely be link bars with sequential turbos instead of a smaller turbo that can cause back pressure eventually. Have you ever tested 2 larger turbos to not have back pressure problems but still cut down on spool time? Are you talking about, have I ever tried sequential stuff on the engine dyno? I have not tried a sequential where you bring the second one on. The problem is it's very complex in terms of gating the exhaust setup to drive only one turbo and then the other. And then also, every bit as important, gating the compression or the cold side as well, because if you bring another turbo online, essentially, you have to have valves that don't allow backfeeding the other turbo. And that's a difficult thing. It's not difficult at an OEM level, but it is difficult to configure on the engine dyno. I'd like to do a vacuum pump. Haven't decided if I should take the hit and run it back to the intake or old school atmospheric dump. We on a PCV, Bill, we vent to atmosphere on the engine dyno. Everything, whether it's NA or whatever it is, supercharged, turbocharged, whatever. On the LS stuff, we have breather vents on the valve covers that just go up to big 3/4 lines or whatever, 3/4 inch lines, and we have one on each side now. Before, we were just doing it with one, and that seemed to work as long as the opening in the valve cover was big enough. But all of them are vented to atmosphere. The center valley cover, the other valve cover, the passenger or the passenger side valve cover where the oil fill tank is, or the oil fill is, that one's vented to atmosphere. And then we had one on the driver's side in the rear that was vented to atmosphere. Now I have those BTR valve covers, and they have big AN fittings on them, and that's all just vented to atmosphere. I could do the exhaust. You could do a Panavac, but that's not necessary. If you just vent it to atmosphere, it's fine. Let's heat the rings better, and you don't have to worry about pump carbon buildup. You think that drawing the crankcase out seats the rings better? On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a turbo. There you go. Yeah, for people out there, make sure that you, to your loved ones that are thinking about getting you stuff, tell them, I don't want a tie. I don't want socks. I want a turbo or something that has equally turbo-y goodness. I'm interested in tearing this 5.3 apart and spending money. I haven't pulled valve covers because it scatters. I have a 6-liter upgrade. Are heartbeat hex good enough for a turbo? Yes, as long as you don't detonate it. You must not understand what I'm saying. If you make it to where the exhaust scavenges the crankcase pressure, it will seal the rings better, and you don't have to worry about oil deposits. A Panavac system is not something that's normally done on street cars, and it's unnecessary on a street car. It works just fine just running it to atmosphere. A lot of guys run it to a catch can, and then a catch can that you could drain. Would bigger bore or bigger stroke of the same cubic inch change anything for spool or efficiency? No, because it doesn't have a big effect on a change in the power curve. What you're interested in for spool is a change in low speed power. Wherever you're wanting the turbo to come on, the more power that you can generate down in the lower engine speed, the quicker the turbo will spool up. Just juggling bore and stroke to have the same displacement doesn't have a big effect on power output. The displacement change itself, like if you go from a 4.8 to a 5.3, regardless of whether you did that with a bore or stroke, the 5.3 is going to have produced better boost response on the same size turbo than the 4.8 will. And it doesn't matter that you got there with that's a really, really tiny thing, whether you got there with bore or stroke. We have intercoolers and LS turbo manifolds or headers available at the store. And how's the kit coming? Yes, we will have the intercoolers. I don't know if the intercoolers are in stock yet, but we have turbo manifolds that we did castings on. Do you have low buck, small buck Chevy cams? No small buck Chevy cams. How many miles is too many to warrant buying an LS1? Well, all of our big bang motors that we ran that run perfect, and all the motors I've got from the wrecking yard are 100 to 300,000 miles, and they run just fine. And they make the same power that a new one does. Have you ever run 3/8 push rods on a 292 inline 6? Do you have to grind the block for clearance? I have not ever tried that and don't know why you would ever need to do that. Given the RPM range and the springs that you'd be using on a 292, unless you're building a race version of that, there would be no reason to run a 3/8 push rod on there. I've never run a 3/8 push rod on an LS. Even the 8,000 RPM stuff that we didn't get a 3/8 push rod. I know a lot of guys are doing that. I don't necessarily know that those guys have tested 5/16 push rods, like 105 wall or 120 wall 5/16 push rods to see if that works rather than go to a 3/8 push rod. Like, do they have deflection? Do they have a harmonics problem with the smaller diameter push rod? I'd like to. The guys wouldn't have tested that. Only guys that have a Spintron are going to be able to answer that question. I have an LQ4 with the next gen 7875. I'm willing to sacrifice max power for strong low and mid range. What cam would you suggest I run? You should get one, and they're on sale now. You should get one of our low buck truck cams or the truck plus cam, depending on where your stall converter is on the combination that you're running. Either one of those are going to be fine. And you're not going to sacrifice max power because unless you're turning the turbo up to its absolute maximum, you're not going to sacrifice anything by changing the camshaft on it. Like a low buck truck camshaft is a 1,000+ horsepower camshaft with the right turbo, like one of our G42s. That next gen also works well. looking at buying a 2001 C5. Those are good deals. There's lots of performance on a C5 Corvette. I like the C6s better. I just like the way that they look better. But a C5 is a lot less money, and you get all of the performance that you would get on the later one. I have an 04 Chevy Silverado 5.3. Okay, I've got an 02 Truck Norris cam. Question is a 200 shot of nitrous hard to tune? Do you have added ring gap in that? Because on a 200 shot, I definitely would be thinking about added ring gap on that. But otherwise, it's not hard to tune at all. Somebody has to tune this so that when you activate the nitrous, and I don't know if the factory stuff can do this, it might be able to do it. You have to take timing out. Like getting the air fuel is not hard at all. In fact, with a wet setup, you can do that without doing any tune on the factory fuel injection. The problem is you need to take timing out. So that whoever the tuner is, they have to take timing out upon activation of the nitrous. How about a 355 Chevy with twin GT45s? How much power would it make? Well, the GT45s are like 700 to 750 a piece. So they'll support that much. Now, whether or not the motor that you're putting together will be able to take that is a different thing. Diesels typically have twin scroll manifolds that help spool turbos at low RPM. I've tried leaving the computer on the page with the turbo. My wife just changed it to pages that she wants. I get the stuff that she wants. I never get a turbo. You have to keep, Rodney, you just have to keep sending her reminders of screenshots. Turbo, 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 turbo. All I want for Christmas is boost. Ran it without oil pressure. That's not good. .292 has a solid roller, heavy springs, 11. Oh, the length of the push rod. Yeah, that would be a problem. Just rolling it over on the engine stand, the 5/16 push rods deflect. It's crazy. So do you have what kind of spring pressure do you have, John? Do you know what the spring pressure is? If it's a solid roller, it might be a lot. It might be 200 plus, and then it might be 200, 400, or 200, 500 or something for a solid roller. What turbo cam would you recommend for a LQ4 317 heads? Which heads do you recommend? Well, you got to tell me what kind of power you're trying to make. So the first thing you would need to choose is the turbo. And then the camshaft will be chosen not because you have a turbo or because you have an LQ4 or because you have 317 heads. The camshaft will be chosen for how do you want the thing to drive around. Do you have an automatic? Do you have a stall converter? What kind of idle do you want? All of that stuff. The small engine with the big turbo, is it worth pulling timing at lower RPM to help the turbo spool? You can try that and see if it works. We tried playing with that on the engine dyno when we were trying to get the single turbo to spool when I did my first asymmetrical turbo test way back, and it didn't seem to have a positive effect. But I have seen that work on the street. Do you open ring gap? Do you grind the oil control rings too? No. Do not touch the oil control rings. There's no reason to gap those. Those are far enough down on the piston to where you're not going to put a bunch of heat in those. Just make sure you have the minimum that's recommended, which is somewhere near 15 thousandths. And if you've got more than that, it's fine. Venting the atmosphere in a lot of cases makes a mess under the engine bay. Yeah, but not if you're just venting pressure. You have to have a baffle in the valve cover so that you're not venting raw oil. But that's why a lot of guys use catch cans, and that works good. .200 seat, 500 open. Okay. Yeah, and on a push rod that long, you're not only going to need 3/8, but they're going to have to be pretty thick wall too. The length is a big thing, as well as the, because a 5/16 push rod that's this long is pretty easy to bend. Woke up at 12:45 to catch TSP's Black Friday sale. Snagged a sleeved LS 427, $64.99. Appears they're sold out. Yes, sometimes you have to be the early bird there and get that stuff. I remember people rushing down to Best Buy and all that stuff to be the first ones in line so you can get the stuff that's only available there. I'm getting nonstop Black Friday sale announcements on email. A short block, yeah. That's good. A 427, that's good. So is it a what block is that? If it's a 427, is it a LSX block or what block is it? Because to make a 427, it's best to do that with a big bore and not a long stroke. That can be problematic unless it has a lot of sleeve length in it. So junkyard turbo stuff, definite plus. Do a Magnum engine, and one of the ones I do want to do that I haven't done yet is I do want to do the Gen 2 LT1. Shane has a fantastic story about running more nitrous under boost because you need a ratio of air to nitrous to keep things happy with big something. I like Shane. Shane's a good guy. He's got a lot of good stories. He's done a lot of cool stuff. I gave him a shout out when we were doing the because I like the one that the Street Alpha podcast that Shane did with him. It was really good, and so we talked a little bit about that. But yeah, no, I like Shane's stuff. What do you think of Borg EFR series turbos and experience with them? They are really good, but a lot like the Garrett stuff. Is it for some people it's just pricey. Because when you're talking about two turbos, like if you get an EFR or some of the precision stuff, but certainly the Garrett stuff, they're excellent turbos, and you just it's hard to get better stuff than that. But then for a lot of guys, particularly guys that be watching this, that's not the question. The question isn't what is the best turbo I can buy. It's going to be an expensive one. The question is, can I achieve what I want to achieve at a lower price? So if your goal is to make 1,000 horsepower, you don't need a $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 turbo to do that. You could very easily do that with something that's much less expensive. So that's usually the question that most of the guys that are watching my stuff ask. They don't ask what the best thing is because I'm not trying to win in a particular class where you definitely would run a turbo like that. Because you have to, in a class racing specific series, you have to do the best of all of the things because everybody else is going to be doing that. And if you're limited in turbo size, you have to have a turbo that's the best at that size. That's not going to be a low dollar turbo. It's going to, I mean, they're good, but it's not going to be what these are. And so getting to that level costs a lot of money. Do I need EFI if I put a turbo on a small block Chevy? No, if you look at the thumbnail, the turbos, when we ran the twins on that small block Chevy, we ran twins blowing through a blow-through carburetor. But a blow-through carburetor is not a whole bunch less inexpensive than running fuel injection is. There's a Black Friday sale. This place got Richard Holden Performance. We do have stuff on sale. We do have stuff on sale. One of the other questions I get is, we get this all the time about people wanting to be dealers or whatever. We're like, look, we don't have if you look at the pricing on our stuff, we don't have price structure where we can have a whole bunch of different levels of stuff. We don't have like, this is the retail price, this is the dealer price, this is a wholesale price, whatever. Guys that are doing this have big companies and stuff and have their price of their retail price, it's way up there. They have structure between that and whatever their cost was. We don't have that. We can't have dealers because we don't. I mean, the thing sells for a low enough. We are the low buck guys, so the thing is already priced at a level that, hey, look, we're making a little bit of money, but not enough to where we can have dealers because there's not the pricing for that. And also, we can't go, hey, look, at Black Friday is 50% off. Okay, well, we lose a lot of money every time we sell one. That just doesn't make sense. Put a catch can on my 04, fill up in a week, even after a new upgraded valve cover. So I've restricted the intake vacuum with a smaller hole in the fitting. I don't like drawing oil vapor into the intake manifold. That's a definite source of detonation. If you draw oil vapor into your intake manifold, now it's doing that obviously with more with a lot of vacuum. But if you look at that, also you have to seal that against boosts. If you are drawing that into the intake manifold, you have to have a check valve on there. But if you look at a typical LS intake manifold, and I think Hemis are the same way, that you are drawing that into the manifold, it's like filled with oil. It's your intake manifold in an LS is essentially your catch can. And that's not a good place for your catch can. You don't want that oil vapor in there because it ignites at a much lower temperature than the air fuel mixture does. And so it will definitely create detonation. So you don't want to do that. Getaway. I've been a little MI struggling with flu. I hope you're feeling better, man. What do you think about ATM carbs? I've heard people not having to touch anything. I don't know what an ATM carb is. There might be better turbos than Garrett, but they don't share data. I'm not spending precision prices to guess on turbo specs. Yeah, and again, like I said, that's not a level that I look at because it's not a level that I'm trying to achieve for anything specific. I'm never racing in a class or trying to go to Le Mans or whatever. I'm not doing that. So that's not a necessity. The catch can is connected manifold vacuum. It should suggest a PCV valve. Also, GPI is local to me. Wonder if you ever run their cams. I have. I did stuff with the guys from BTR who had some of their cams, who tested their stuff. I didn't know that I've ever run one of their cams, but they obviously, I mean, they have lots of dyno testing. They do good stuff. They know how to make power. But there's nothing magic about cams. I mean, if you get to a point where everybody offers a 218 camshaft that starts with 218 on the intake, there's only so much that you can do with the rest of the things, starting with that kind of camshaft. And guys that are whittling away with, okay, once we've tried a 218 224, a 218 230, a 218 236, a 218 218, a 218 210. I don't know why you do that, but once you get that range, and then you've played with LSAs, and you could do all that. So you can do an infinite number of combinations there. But once you've exhausted that, once you swung it in every direction, once you've gotten to where that camshaft adds a 218 camshaft, let's say that it adds 50 or 60 horsepower or whatever compared to some kind of stock cam. Once you get that, okay, this one added 50, this one added 54, this one added 56, this one added 48, this one, once you get to that point, you're whittling away and spending lots of time in development of smaller and smaller gains. Once you get to a point where, okay, this cam adds this kind of power within this range, within this bubble range, there's not going to be a version of that cam that starts at 218 that adds 100 horsepower where the other ones were only adding 50. Doesn't matter whose name is on it. Doesn't matter what they promise. Doesn't matter how magic they are. None of that matters. And so, like I said, after a point, is 4 horsepower better than another one? That's better. But is 4 horsepower better enough for me to take the cam out that makes 4 horsepower less and put that camshaft in? It's not for me. I'm not going to go through that for 4 horsepower. If it's 40, yeah, I'm going to do that. If it's 4, I'm not going to do that. Thanks for all the knowledge throughout the years. I'm not an LS guy. I'm a J-Series guy. Very nice. Jimmy has the J-Series in the NSX. But I know lots of things apply to engines in general. Yeah, and we're going to be doing more J-Series stuff on Jimmy's NSX once that thing is running. He just did a K-Series transmission swap on the J-Series swap in the NSX. So once that's running, we're going to try a few different turbos and stuff. Vent catch can under the hood with no vacuum. Yeah, you can vent. We vented the atmosphere on the dyno. You can also vent that up to a catch can under the hood, and it's fine. You just have to make sure that there's no vacuum leaks, which there wouldn't be if you cap the intake manifold. Is it important to have a high flowing head on a turbo for street cruising, or can I use stock castings? You can turbocharge any combination with any cylinder head. I want to know, when do you go ported heads? I know it's higher power stuff, but there's a specific point where you just crank up the boost until the turbo taps out. Well, your question shouldn't be general like that. That's not a thing. You have to ask specifically about the thing that you have, and then the thing that you have versus what power level do you want. So you have a 4.8 LS and you want 700 horsepower. You don't have to worry about that. You want 1700, then we need to talk about ported heads. So it would be specific to your combination. You have a 5-liter Ford, ported heads are going to come into play at an earlier power level because the stock ones suck so bad. On the LS motor, they're really good, and so that's less of a problem. On an LS3, you don't need to be considering that until beyond what the block will take. ATM is a brand. They use 40 to 50 Holly-style carbs, and you tell them your combo, and they build it to your specs. Also, you don't think people can have the same cam specs, but one makes more for more RPM. I don't know what you mean by have the same cam specs, but one makes more for more RPM. I don't know what you mean by that. If two cams, one from one manufacturer and one from another cam manufacturer, have exactly the same cam specs, the lift duration, lobe separation angle, intake opening, intake valve close, all of those. So if all of those things are the same, the cams are going to do exactly the same thing. The fact that one has one name on it, one has another name on it, doesn't matter. You'd have to change the lobe profile dramatically to make some sort of change in power. Spend months of R&D to gain 15 horsepower with the cam so limited by the turbo. Yeah, the 1,000 horsepower turbo is still going to make 1,000 horsepower. But 15 horsepower on a cam from one cam to another cam, that would be worth it. But 5 or 4 is not worth it. If you tried asking AI to design your perfect camshaft, just curious what it would spit out. And no, I have no interest in asking AI anything about camshafts. It doesn't know what I know. It doesn't have test results that I have. I have a first gen 4200 engine. What is a way to get 350 horsepower with boost? Definitely. 427 is a GM53 bored and sleeved 4-inch stroke wide scope piston. Okay, so you're using a stock 5.3, a 5.3 iron. I mean a 5.3 aluminum block, I'm assuming. Yeah, as long as they sleeve it and you have the sleeve length in there, that's fine. Brian Truly has a lot of sales on the word that his valve events are better. Then the camshaft has different valve events. So different valve events means a different camshaft. And Brian does a lot of R&D, both on the engine dyno and on their development software, which is the highest level of stuff, and also on the Spintron. So they are, which is awesome of them, they are constantly looking to evolve the camshaft. But again, even if they did, like their latest versions of their camshafts, the V3 stuff on the truck camshafts are really good. but they're not 20 better than what they were. So do you want that? 5-liter Ford, you'll need head gaskets. Yeah, you'll need better heads, but you'll also need head gaskets. Yeah, I don't. There's stuff that I want to do with AI, but it would be more other things, not what camshaft works or what intake manifold works, none of that stuff. Do you like Rhodes lifters? I've never tried them. I think we've only ever run them way back at West Tech, and I didn't run it. Somebody else did. I think Jeff Smith or somebody ran them on a small block Chevy on a hydraulic flat tappet deal. But I honestly don't even remember if there was a test done on the idle quality and stuff. I like the idea, and I really would want them to work, but I have never tested it. How is Steve Brule doing? Steve Brule is doing awesome. In fact, I need to give him a call now. I should have sent a thing to say happy Thanksgiving to him, but I need to call it, see how he's doing. I haven't talked to him for about maybe a week, but he's doing good. We talk often. Steve's a great guy. Steve is chock full of awesomeness. And I think when we're talking about the small block Chevy stuff and big block Chevy stuff, because of the like turbos that we have, the 3584s, the G35, G42, certainly, that with a lot of these other guys' motors, small blocks, big blocks, Dodge, Chevy, Pontiacs, whatever, Oldsmobile, Buick, whatever, with these turbos, you can get to the limit of something else, like the block, certainly rods or cranks, those kinds. You can get to the limit of those things way before you would get to the limit of the turbo. And especially if you had two of them, you would get to the limit of something before you get to the limit of those things. But, you know, when we have conversations, people want to talk about like absolutes. Oh, how much will these support? How much power can I make? Well, in most cases, what they're thinking is, can I make 700 or 800 horsepower? And what they're asking is, I have 1800 horsepower with a turbo. Can I? You're not going to get there. And you shouldn't be trying to get there with those on a 700 or 800 horsepower thing anyways. And also 700 or 800 horsepower, when you're used to talking about a 300 horsepower small block, which is probably what you have, that's a huge jump. That is a monumental jump in power and performance, and the necessity for driving talent and drivetrain and brakes and suspension and all these other things that stop talking about, you know, 4-digit or mid 4-digit or high 4-digit power levels. That's not a thing that you need to think about. Add 100 horsepower, or, and more importantly, 100 foot-pounds or 100 plus foot-pounds of torque, or 150 or 200. Add that to something that you have and go, oh my, this is really awesome. Because turbos are like that. Once you add boost to something, you're like, oh yeah, this is definitely the way God and nature intended this to be. I want to turbocharge an 86 Mustang GT. What PSI do you recommend for a stock engine? What options do I have for tuning on the speed density? You can go any sort of standalone. I don't know about the factory ECU anymore. I don't know if there are still, if there's still software for that, like AutoLogic or those kinds of things. And I don't know specifically that computer. Now, maybe you can hook an A9L up to that harness and still make it work. But you shouldn't be worried about what boost level is. The first thing you should be worried about is how am I going to tune this? So for any amount of boost, it's even at 7 pounds, you're going to make a 50% change in power. So it's going to be dramatic. The Mustang's going to feel a lot better. Do you have a clutch? You know, do you have the T5 will work fine for that, for 50% more power or whatever. But don't be worried about running lots of boost. Worry about running very low boost and making it perfect so that it doesn't ever detonate. Because once you detonate it, you're going to break it. So don't detonate it. So make sure that that's right. Get enough fuel pump, get enough injector, be able to tune it, make it right at like 7 pounds, and then go up and boost. Do you work with Dulcich or Freiberger? Yeah, I like both of those guys. I haven't done anything with Freiberger in a long time, since before Westech, long ago. So I don't think I've done, so I don't remember when the last time that they asked me to be on Engine Masters. That would have been the last thing I did with Freiberger. I saw him when we were out at the duct tape drags. Dulcich I went down and did a video with at his dyno place, and I'm going to go down and do some more with Dulcich. I like both those guys because they're real car guys. They do serious stuff. DIY Auto Tune has a plug and play option for the 5-liter. So yeah, Bill's got you hooked up there. That's a good setup. Will changing the cam change the torque peak? Would that change the boost threshold? The torque peak is way past usually way past where turbo spool up is. So that's not the issue. You're worried about turbo spool up happens way before the torque peak. That's usually pre-torque peak where boost response happens. Depending on what power level you want, what the motor is, and all that. But changing the camshaft can definitely change the boost response, because if you put a camshaft in that hurts low speed power below the torque peak, which is normally what it's going to do, because a lot of times you can change a cam and get more peak torque. It'll happen usually at a higher engine speed, but usually the trade-off is less power down low where spool is happening. And if you do that, you definitely can hurt the spool rate of the turbo. We just saw Summit Racing is making a new LS block. I've seen it on Engine Power TV. They said it's good to 1,000 horsepower. I've seen you do 1,000 horsepower on a stock block. Yeah, that's just what they're rating it to. And so it's probably would do more than that. What restrictor size should we use on oil feed line? Any difference between a journal versus a ball bearing? Yeah, you're definitely going to have a difference in oil feed for whether it's a journal and a ball bearing. 230, 236, 108, 550 is what Chat GTP said the most ideal cam for max power with the VORTECH 350 and stock bottom end and stock heads and a single plane. Well, so that you know, a 230 on a 108, I would check piston to valve clearance. And also 550 lift isn't going to work with a VORTECH head. You're going to have to modify the head to make 550 lift work. You need to build your engine for the RPM you want to run and then decide how much boost you can run. Yep, Bill, spot on. Journal bearing turbos usually don't use oil restrictors. The kind of off topic, but not. I got 330 horsepower Mercury Marine, a Mercury's big block in a boat. What LS motor could I swap into it, keeping it NA because it's in a boat? Well, it's very, very easy for any LS to make 330 horsepower. The thing that's nice about the big block is that thing probably has 430 foot-pounds of torque. So if it's a big boat and you want to get it up on plane and stuff, that part of it, much more than the power peak horsepower, is going to be the important part. Because I don't know if you're driving, is it an IO? So you're going to want to get that, the average power production before you get to the 330 horsepower is going to be the issue. So I would put a bigger one in, at least a 6-liter, and maybe something bigger than that. The question about port heads, say I want to build a 3.5 liter J series to make 1,000 horsepower. General intake flow 270 and exhaust flow is 180. Takes roughly 30 to 38 pounds. That's a big spread, worthwhile for a 10% increase. Well, I think you're asking the wrong question. What you want to do on a J series, on a 3.5 liter J series, if you're making 1,000 horsepower, you want to make as much NA power as you can if you want to lower the boost where that happens. So does this have, like, that motor needs cams in it, and it also needs a different intake manifold. It needs something other than the stock manifold. Usually what guys do is just shorten the stock one, but you can port the stock one. You can shorten it so it makes more peak power. It's going to sacrifice low speed power, but on 1,000 horsepower J series on a 3.5 liter, you're not going to be real responsive anyways. The head flow will help, but with 200, if it already flows 270 CFM, you have enough intake flow already to get done what you're trying to get done. You can get 570 lift with no machining. You're going to have to change something because you don't have retainer to seal clearance for 570 lift. You're going to have to change the retainers, change the keepers. You're going to have to change something, or you're going to have to machine down the guide, or you're going to have to machine the seat. Can't wait till we have guys running shops based on AI combos. Yeah. You just use raised retainers, and like I said, you got to change something. I have and then a lot of times when you change retainers and keepers on those, you run into a problem with the rocker hitting the retainer because it raises it up so far relative to the valve tip. That can be problematic. I have a 95 Chevy C2500, a TBI. That's a good upgrade to the TBI. A carbureted dual plane is really good, but then I don't know about transmission control in that, since it's a deal. There are throttle body injected deals that you can do. You're just limited. You could put the big block injector in it if you can tune it. You can put the big block throttle body itself, which I think is bigger, so you get more airflow. Edelbrock made an aftermarket intake. I just don't know how much of a gain it is with the throttle body size that you're using. Retainers don't require machining. The valve guide does. So that you have retainer to seal clearance. 25.5 C-ray with an inboard on IO. 330 is roughly 415 foot-pounds in the boat. Could you obtain a 6-liter cam and carb intake MSD box? Yeah, that can work. I would probably, for that, I probably would use a dual plane. A fuel injected one would be better, but you could do it with a carbureted deal. I would use a dual plane. L-Brock Proflow intake is a wonderful TBI. Yeah, that's true. It is. Some sort of other fuel injection on the TBI. And the problem with the TBI is it has multiple things that are going wrong with it or limiting it, let's say. The intake manifold itself, the throttle body itself, the fuel flow. But the fuel flow can be adjusted. Like I said, you can put the big block one on there, and that can get you fairly far. But also the ECU is not good. It's very limited in its processor speed. And it's just, like I said, and then tuning that factory ECU because the motor obviously is going to need the same thing that every motor needs. It needs more head flow. It needs more camshaft. It needs a better intake manifold. And if you do all that, you obviously have to tune that. And so then you have to tune the factory ECU, which can become problematic. Cutter's Performance posted a video of full parts list to get 570 lift with off-the-shelf parts. That's good. Brandon, you should 100% go do that. If that's what you want to do, you should 100% go do that. Tom, more boost. Yes, definitely does it. I have an Aces TBI EFI and jackpot with transmission control on my LS swapped OBS Chevy. Works great. Oh, are you talking about like the 4-hole throttle body thing? You could do that too, I guess. But you'd need a standalone, and the Aces will do that. But yeah, if you're going to go with a standalone fuel injection on the single throttle body injected deal, then you're just doing a standalone, and that works good. Then the sky's the limit. Then you just swap an LS in there, then you're good. If the valve drops far enough for the keeper to hit the valve seal, that could require machining to drop the seal. That's what happens on factory, Michael. I'm sure you know that's what happens on factory VORTECH heads. Is the retainer hits the seal, and so what guys normally do is they have a cutter that you use to machine you remove the seal, machine the guide down. Usually the cutter also machines the valve seat, so that you can put the right spring, or the spring cup, so you can put the right spring in there. That's one way to do it. Obviously, there's another way where you raise the retainer and the keeper. We've done that on big blocks as well. But one of the things that happens is when you start raising the retainer relative to the valve tip, is that they become like flush. And so the rocker doesn't just, the roller rocker tip, if you have roller rockers, doesn't just sit on if you get it so that it's not, so that the valve tip is recessed down relative to the retainer, which you can do, then it's real problematic. Then the roller tip hits that, and instead of hitting, and then it just wants to push the retainer off of the valve, which is not a good situation. Concerning the clearance issues, using a 50 thousandths valve spring shim with a 50 thousandths valve keeper. Next question is, what camshaft would you recommend for a swap, considering you want torque over horsepower? Marty, now I'm trying to remember which one you were talking about. Oh, okay. I think I'd put a Lobbuck truck camshaft in that. 570 is when it hits. At 550, would I have a problem? When what hits? Is the retainer hitting the seal? And when is coil bind on the spring? Could an 86 Mustang with a speed density handheld turbo kit with a setup similar to the VORTECH MAF kit? Yes, for low boost, you probably could do that. you'd need a retard, an FMU, and a fuel pump. You could do that. I would have to ask. You might have to do a mass air conversion on it. I'd have to ask. In fact, Mark just sent me over a thing yesterday to say Happy Thanksgiving. I'd have to ask Sanchez. I never tried to do a speed density turbo setup without a standalone back in the day. So I'd have to ask Mark. I'm thinking that VORTECH that it worked on the 86s as well, but Sanchez would be the guy to ask about that. Can you give me a call? Yeah, did you have a question, Tom? I dealt with that on the GMV6. I used offset retainers and aftermarket springs, but the keepers hit the top of the valve seals on the intake valve. I ran into that with the big block too, because I was trying to science out putting a good beehive spring on there and stuff. And we ran into issues with either the combination of retainer and keeper to try to get us the height that we needed to get rid of coil bind and stuff. And it was problematic. Are you a fan of solid lifter cams? Do they make more power than the same size hydraulic? I am not. I was a fan of the solid lifter stuff when we were doing the original muscle car small block deals. We did some of that stuff, but I'm a much bigger fan of hydraulic rollers. And a solid would make less power than a hydraulic if the specs were exactly the same, because it has lash. So if they're both 230 at 50 and both 550 lift, you actually get less than that on the solid because it has 20,000 slash in it. A micro squirt, either wired or plug and play with a GTX 3584 works great on the 5 liter. Can get 600 lift for 550. Is 20 thousandths enough clearance? Is 20 thousandths enough retainer to seal clearance? Is that what you're talking about? 20 thousandths is a little on the close side. There we go. 1 more minute. I've run them like that, but if you're setting it up and doing it, you should probably try to get more than that. And then make sure that you have at least that 20 or 30 thousandths on coil bind clearance also. Again, we've run them tighter than that, but if you're going to set it up long term, you may as well just take the time and set it up so that it works. Yeah, I was going to bring that up, Bill, but I just thought that we had talked about that enough. that I don't know why you'd be wanting 570 or 600 lift on a VORTECH head, but it will still work. And again, I haven't done enough testing to know that if we put a 600 lift cam on a VORTECH head, even though it's the lift, even though the airflow stalls, does it help? Because it might. Most guys go with smaller stuff than that on the VORTECH headed things because they're not usually trying to get max power unless you were doing a fully ported VORTECH head, which I have seen them get fairly good flow numbers out and make good power, but I haven't ever done that. Are 1.6 rockers okay on stock 70 small block heads? Which 70 small block heads? You just need to make sure. You'd have to mock it up and see, but usually a 1.6 rockers are fine. Having a bunch of machine work done might cost neutral buying new heads. Yeah, you have to look into that. And that's especially the case if you're, okay, I'm going to mill them, I'm going to port them, I'm going to do bigger valves. I'm going to, on the old small block stuff, I'm going to change to, threaded rocker studs and guide plates and stuff. You start adding all that stuff up, especially now with costs, what they are, buying a set on aftermarket, and then you're doing it to iron heads. If you're doing it to, getting a set of aluminum heads starts to look really attractive. You're running a stage 4 small block Chevy cam in it, and are you using unported VORTECH heads? That seems like a lot of camshaft for that combination. But on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. Make sure to check out the Black Friday sales over at richardoldnerperformance.com. And I'm going to be doing another live feed today. We're going to double down. And on the next one, we'll definitely have a poll. I'll see you guys all later.